Welcome to the Jefferson Seed Library's Absolute Beginner's Garden 101, Part 1, Getting Started. We're going to talk about how do you go about starting a garden. Know about what your growing conditions are for your area. How to go about choosing a site for your garden, knowing the light requirements for your plants. We're going to talk about why good soil is important for healthy plants. And then we're going to compare and give the pros and the cons of raised beds, in-ground gardens, and container gardens. And then lastly, we're going to talk about easy plants for beginners to start with. So starting a vegetable garden, you're going to want to grow only what you're interested in eating. If you don't like a certain vegetable, you're not going to want to grow that because you're not going to be interested in taking care of that. You're also going to want to start small and expand over time. As gardeners, we can also often have these grandiose ideas about our dream garden and all that wonderful produce that we're going to have. But gardening takes time and it takes work and it takes energy. And so you want to start small and see what your time allows you to take care of. You're also going to want to read reliable and trusted sources. There's so much information out there and not all of it is good. On the Jefferson Library's website, which is listed below, on the Seed Library page, we have a whole section that has good, reliable sources. And this is what I go to when I'm doing research for the Seed Library. You're also going to want to find other gardeners. Talk to somebody who has some experience gardening. You can learn from their mistakes and maybe avoid them yourself. If there's a seed library in your area, join that. You can get free seeds. You can talk to other gardeners. You can get gardening advice. At our seed library, we have a master gardener who is just full of expert advice that you can talk to and just learn how to better improve your garden. And then don't be afraid to experiment. Experimenting is part of gardening. The best gardeners always try something new and different. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's fine. So the growing conditions for Jefferson, Georgia, we are in zone 8. We have long, hot, humid summers. Our winters are mild, and February is typically our rainiest month. So if you're going to be working in our clay soil, February is a great month to do that because all that rain makes the soil easier to work in. You're also going to want to be aware of your frost and your freeze dates. For Jefferson, our average freeze typically starts mid-November. Our average frost typically ends in mid-March. And then just be aware that these are average times. 50% of the time they're going to start before that date. 50% of the time you're going to have a frost or a freeze after that date. A good rule of thumb is to wait until after your average frost to plant most plants. And then just be aware that you still may have to cover them and protect them from a sudden frost. So when you're choosing a site for your garden, you want to start small. When I started my garden, I only had these 2 beds. And then I expanded to what you see here. And I've further expanded so that each bed is the same height. And that in my tomato field is about all I can take care of, working a full-time job and taking care of all the stuff that you have to do when you're at home. If I had anything bigger, even though I would love to be able to grow more things, it just wouldn't work out. Things would fall through the cracks and just the plants wouldn't be healthy. So start small, expand to the size that you are able to take care of with the time that you have. It will save you money in the long run. When you're choosing a site for your garden, you're also going to want to know how much light that area is going to get. Most garden vegetables are full sun and they're going to need a minimum of 8 hours of sunlight a day. So you also want to just keep in mind that some plants, like tomatoes, they need 10 hours of sunlight if they're going to get that full flavor. So if you want to know what parts of your yard or your garden are sunny and shady, you can keep track by creating your own chart. Just mark on there what part of your yard you're keeping track of, and then just track the sun throughout the day. And then you'll know if that area is going to have enough sunlight for your plants. These are some minimum light requirements for your vegetables and your fruits. Keep in mind that the more sunlight these plants have, the better yield and the better quality of your harvest you will have. I often plant my lettuce, my kale, and my spinach in full sun. They will get shade for most of the morning, and then the rest of the time they have full sun. And that seems to work okay for me. You'd have to experiment with your area to find out if that's going to work for you. And then one other consideration to keep in mind when you're planting a garden is that you want to avoid planting your vegetables around an established tree. An established tree is going to suck up all the water and all the nutrients out of the soil. And so even if those vegetables are getting enough sunlight, they're not going to thrive because that tree is taking everything that those plants need. So some other considerations that you want to keep in mind when you're choosing a site for your garden is you want to plant near a water source. The last thing you want to do is to spend all this time and energy lugging water and dragging hoses all over your yard to water your garden. So if you have it near a water source, you're going to be a little more motivated to water your garden. You also want to keep in mind wind can be a problem. Wind will dry out your plants and your beds. So will you need a windbreak? Will you need to maybe plant maybe some bamboo or something to break that wind, or put up a fence? You also want to keep in mind, is your land flat? Is it hilly? If it's hilly, you might need to do a terraced garden. And then also keep in mind the location may determine pests, especially our four-footed friends. If they might have a deer problem or other critters that might come and think that, oh, you created a great bounty for them to have their supper. So keep that in mind as well. And then once you know the location of your garden, you want to make sure you have good soil. Plants get most of everything they need, nearly everything that they need from the soil. And so if you have poor soil, your plants are going to be poor. If you have good soil, your plants are going to be great. So we're going to go through very briefly, I promise, just what makes good soil. So soil is made up of mineral matter. This is the nutrients that your plants are going to take up. It's half of it is pore space, which is your water and your air. Without air, spaces in the soil, your roots cannot develop properly. And if that water can't get down to the roots, your water is what brings the nutrients to the roots so the plants can take it up. So if you don't have air and water, if your soil is compact, then your roots are going to develop properly. And then you have your organic matter, which is your leaves, your sticks, things that decompose. So 4 types of soil. There are more types in this room. I'm going to talk about 4. You have your sandy, which is very porous. It doesn't hold water well, and it's very poor in nutrients. Then you have your silt, which is a little more nutrients than sand and hold water a little better than sand does, but it's still not your ideal type of soil. Then you have your clay. This is what we have in Jefferson, Georgia. Clay, once it's moist, it holds water well. When it dries out, it's hard as a brick. But clay is really rich in nutrients, so it has a lot of the things the plants love, and so they can grow well. But clay doesn't drain well. Plants can get waterlogged and they'll drown and the roots will rot. And then so clay also has a problem if it gets really compact. And so when it gets compact, then that air and that water can't get down and your roots can't develop. The type of soil you really want for your plants is called loam. This is a combination of sand, silt, and clay. So it retains water really well, but it also drains, so your plants don't get waterlogged. And loam is considered the best type of soil for most plants. In Jefferson, if you're going to plant a garden in the ground, there's some things you're going to want to do that will over time change your soil structure to make it more loamy. So you're going to want to do things like use organic mulch. Organic mulch is anything that's going to decompose. So that's your hay, your straw, your wood chips, your pine needles. You can also add finished compost or well-rotted compost. This is anything or your compost that has gone through the complete process that it needs to, so there's no seeds in it that are going to germinate and create weeds. And then you can also add some sand to your clay soil to help loosen that up. So the key takeaway that I want you to have for soil is you want to never walk on your beds. So no matter if you have an in-ground or a raised bed, you want to have garden paths that you can walk on where you can harvest your plants from, do your weeding, so that you're not compacting that soil because that's going to damage the ability of your roots of your plants to grow properly. When you're finally ready to plant, when you know the kind of soil you have, or you're going to buy your soil, you're going to want to check for utility lines. So please, before you dig, call. Your neighbors are not going to thank you if you create a blackout. You're going to want to mark off the area. You want to try and keep your beds to about 4 feet wide. This will allow you from either side to reach halfway across so that you can weed and you can fertilize and get to all of your plants. And then you want to make sure you have garden paths. You can make them any size you want, but 1 to 1.5 feet is about enough for you to walk on and then also be able to harvest. You'll need to remove any existing vegetation and then loosen that soil if you're going to plant in ground. And if you're going to plant in ground, I highly recommend doing a soil test. The website that you can go to for Georgia is extension.uga.edu. That will have all the information on there of how you can get a soil test. The reason this is important is in a soil test, they'll tell you what kind of nutrients are in your soil, and that way you know what kind of fertilizer you need for your plants. And then it's always good to add 2 to 3 inches of compost into your soil, and that's good for any type of garden that you have. The types of garden that we're going to talk about in-ground, container, and raised bed. So let's dive into the pros and the cons of each of these. For an in-ground, the benefits of an in-ground garden is that it retains moisture better because it's a huge area. There's also minimal setup costs. All you got to do is remove that vegetation and loosen that soil. The drawbacks: there's more bending and kneeling because it's on the ground. And for Jefferson, that clay soil is really difficult to work in, and pretty much anywhere that you're at, you're most likely going to have to amend the soil to make it more loamy or to get the nutrient balance right. There's also container gardens. This is great for a small space. So if you have just a patio or just a balcony, container gardening is for you. You can also control the type of soil that's going to go into your pots because you're most likely going to be buying it. The drawbacks with container gardening is there's a lot of watering. You're probably going to have to be watering once a day, if not twice a day. And some vegetables simply will not work in containers. It could also be expensive because those containers and those pots, it adds up. And if your soil dries out, it's really difficult to rehydrate that soil. The last type of garden that we're going to talk about are raised beds. The benefits of this is There's less bending and there's less weeding, at least per my experience. And you can also control the type of soil. The drawback is there's more watering. A raised bed is a ginormous container, and it is going to dry out more quickly. And there's also high upfront costs because you're buying the raised bed, and then you're buying the soil, and then you have all the time that you need to put that bed together. We're going to go over some tips for container gardening. And I should state, I do all three of these. I have an in-ground garden for my tomatoes. Most of my vegetables are in a raised bed. And then I have a few vegetables and herbs in containers on my patio. So some tips to container gardening. I highly recommend a water bottle reservoir system. This is a stop-gap measure only. I do not recommend this for you to rely upon for your for solely watering needs. It is a stop-gap measure only. It's easy to set up. You just get an empty water bottle, screw that lid on, poke some holes in the bottom of the lid, cut off the bottom of the bottle, partially bury it, fill up the bottle with water, and then you get a slow drip irrigation system. This really helps for those hot summer afternoons when all that heat is radiating up from the bottom of the patio, and then you have the sun beating down on your plants. That slow drip irrigation will help them get through those afternoons for your watering times, whether you water in the morning or whether you water in the evening. The reason you don't want to rely upon a water bottle reservoir system for your watering needs is that, remember when we talked about soil, 50% of that soil is air and water. You want to refresh the oxygen in your soil. So what you're going to want to do at least once or however often you need to water is pour that water onto your pot, let it drain out the bottom, refresh that oxygen in the soil. And this also gets rid of the salt residue from fertilizers because you don't want salt to build up in your soil. That will kill your plants. Also, when you're doing a container garden and even a raised bed, you want to make sure you're using the right kind of soil. Most soil mixes meant for outdoors will be fine. I do recommend garden soil versus potting mix, but you can use whatever you want. Just be aware that once that soil dries out, it's so hard to rehydrate it. And then also you'll want to make sure that you have the right sized pot for your plants. For example, most tomatoes are going to need a 5-gallon bucket because their root systems are so big, and you need healthy roots to have healthy plants. While lettuce, for the leafy kinds of lettuce, you can get away with planting those in window boxes. This is a chart that has the size pots and that go with the plants. And you can see here, you can have 1 to 2 gallon plants, and there's a list of what plants you can grow in there. And then also a 2 to 5 gallon pot as well. And there's certain vegetables that unfortunately their root systems are so big that you're just going to need to plant them in the ground. Good plants that you can plant in pots. Virtually any herb out there is going to do very well in a pot. And then also you can do tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, as long as you have the right sized pot for your plants. So what should you grow in your garden? Grow things you and your family like to eat. Then find out if those things grow well in your area. Some things, just depending on where you live, unfortunately, they're not going to do well. If you were up in Washington, there's certain varieties of tomatoes where you don't have a long enough growing season to grow them. In Georgia, we have long, hot, humid summers, so you can grow just about any variety of tomato you want. Then you want to find out when to plant it. We have on the Jefferson Public Library website, which is listed here. If you click on Seed Library and then Garden Helps, we have a planting chart that is specific for our area. So no matter where you are, find a planting chart that is specific for your area, and that will help guide you as to when you need to plant things. And then know what varieties will grow well in your area and what won't. Oftentimes this comes down to experimentation, finding out what varieties of peppers or what varieties of tomatoes do really well in your area. And then start with easy things to grow. This is a list of things that do well in Georgia. For Georgia, we basically have cool weather crops and warm weather crops. Your cool weather crops, and I'll talk more about this in a upcoming video on Absolute Beginner Gardening 101. But basically, cool weather crops you're going to want to plant in early spring or late fall. Your warm weather crops you're going to plant late spring to summer. And all of these do very well in Georgia. So you do well to try any of these. But some of the easy ones to grow are listed here. Beans are very easy, whether they're bush beans, pole beans, lima beans, any kind of bean, they're easy to grow. Your melons, your watermelon, your cantaloupe, all of those are easy. Virtually any kind of herb does extremely well in Georgia. Your lettuces and cowpeas, which are your black-eyed peas, cucumbers, eggplants, turnips, all of those do very well in Georgia. And then I have here as well some things that are not as easy. They're about intermediate kind of plants to grow. In our Jefferson Seed Library, they're classified as medium. These are your peppers, your squash, and your tomatoes. And the reason that they are medium is that there's a lot of pest problems that these plants have. They have some other problems as well, but most of them are pests. But don't let that discourage you. You can go on to the Jefferson Public Library's website, which is listed here. Click on Seed Library, and then scroll down to growing tips. And for each of the plants that are in our catalog, we teach you how to grow them in Georgia. And if you have a seed library near you, they probably do the same thing. So wrapping part one up, we talked about how to go about starting your garden. Start small. Grow only what you want to eat. Make sure you know the growing conditions for your area. When you're choosing a site, make sure that you know the site has the right amount of light that your vegetables need. We talked about how you need to have good soil so that your roots can grow properly so that you can have healthy plants. We compared and contrasted raised beds, in-ground beds, and container gardening. You can choose one or all of these different types of gardens. And then lastly, we talked about easy plants for beginners. I want to leave you with two final thoughts. Be willing to learn from your mistakes. Don't get discouraged if things don't go well for you. That's okay. That happens to every gardener every year with something. Just be willing to learn of what you did this year and try it a little different next year. See if that works better. And then just be aware that each year is a different gardening adventure. I do want to thank our sponsors for the Jefferson Seed Library. It is made possible by Howington's Feed and Supply, as well as Burpee, and community members who donate to our collection. Thank you so much. If you would like more about just how to do gardening, just tips, hacks, advice, good resources, click onto jefferson.prlib.org and click on Seed Library. There's a wealth of information to help you have the best garden possible.